The autumn wind whipped through the streets of Busan's art district as Haejin stepped off the bus, pulling her worn leather suitcase behind her. The district pulsed with life. Street artists worked at their easels, while gallery windows displayed splashes of color that seemed to mock her own gray mood. She checked the address on her phone again, confirming the location of her small rented apartment. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The neighborhood wasn't what she had expected when she'd hastily booked it 2 weeks ago. Instead of the quiet residential area she'd imagined, she found herself in the heart of Busan's creative quarter. Cafes spilled onto the sidewalks, their tables occupied by artists sketching in notebooks, and students engaged in animated discussions about technique and inspiration. The scent of fresh paint mingled with coffee in the air. Haejin paused at a crosswalk, watching a group of art students carrying portfolios across the street. Their laughter echoed off the buildings, reminding her of a time when she too had been that carefree. Before the marriage, before Yungho, before everything had fallen apart. She adjusted her grip on her suitcase and pressed forward. Her apartment building stood between a pottery studio and a small gallery. The stairs creaked as she climbed to the 3rd floor, each step a reminder that there would be no going back. The key turned smoothly in the lock, revealing a space smaller than she remembered from the photos, but flooded with natural light from a large window overlooking the street. Haejin spent that first day unpacking her few belongings, arranging them in the tiny space with precision. Each item had been carefully chosen when she left Seoul, leaving behind the expensive furniture and designer clothes that Yungho had insisted upon. Here, she had only what she truly needed. The weekend brought the monthly art fair to the neighborhood. Haejin hadn't planned to attend, but the energy of the crowd drew her out of her apartment. Vendors lined the streets, displaying everything from traditional paintings to contemporary installations. The atmosphere buzzed with creativity and possibility. She wandered through the stalls without any particular destination in mind, until a painting stopped her in her tracks. The canvas wasn't large, perhaps 3 feet square, but its impact hit her like a physical force. The artist had captured a woman emerging from darkness, her form constructed of shattered pieces slowly coming together in the light. Haejin stood transfixed, seeing her own struggle reflected in the artwork. "It speaks to you." The voice came from behind her, deep and thoughtful. Haejin turned to find a man studying not the painting, but her reaction to it. He wore a simple black suit that spoke of quiet wealth, his presence commanding but not overwhelming. "I've been watching people's responses to this piece all morning. You're the first to truly see it." "I'm not sure what you mean," Haejin replied, attempting to step back from both the painting and the stranger. "I'm Yungho," he said, extending his hand. "I own the gallery that represents this artist." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that softened his businesslike appearance. "And you're looking at this painting the way someone looks at their own reflection." Haejin hesitated before taking his hand. "I'm Haejin, and you're very perceptive for a businessman." Yungho laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Art isn't just business. It's about understanding people, their pain, their hopes." He gestured to the painting. "This piece, for instance, the artist created it after surviving a car accident. She told me it represented her journey of putting herself back together." They spent the next hour discussing the painting, their conversation flowing naturally from technique to meaning, from the artist's intention to their own interpretations. Yungho spoke with passion about supporting emerging artists, about the importance of giving voice to new perspectives in the art world. "Would you like to see more of her work?" Yungho asked as the fair began to wind down. "My gallery is hosting her first solo exhibition next month." Haejin found herself nodding before she could overthink it. In Seoul, she would have declined, worried about Jiho's reaction to her spending time with another man. But this wasn't Seoul, and she wasn't that person anymore. As they exchanged contact information, Haejin noticed Yungho's careful attention to her comfort level, the way he maintained a respectful distance while remaining engaged in their conversation. It was refreshingly different from the controlling behavior she had grown accustomed to. The sun was setting as Hae-jin walked back to her apartment, casting long shadows across the art district's colorful streets. The painting's image stayed with her, the woman emerging from darkness, piecing herself back together. For the first time since leaving Seoul, she felt something stir inside her. Not hope exactly, but possibility. In this vibrant neighborhood, surrounded by creativity and unexpected connections, perhaps she too could begin to reconstruct herself from the shattered pieces of her past. The art gallery became Hae-jin's sanctuary over the next few weeks. Yungho introduced her to Busan's thriving art community, taking her to hidden galleries tucked away in narrow alleys and experimental exhibitions in converted warehouses. Their conversations flowed naturally, ranging from discussions about brush techniques to debates about contemporary art movements. One particularly memorable evening, they found themselves walking along Gwangali Beach after visiting a pop-up exhibition. The bridge lights reflected off the water, creating patterns that reminded Hae-jin of the abstract paintings they'd just viewed. Yungho seemed different that night, more subdued than usual. "My brother would have loved this view," he said suddenly, stopping to look out over the water. He was a photographer. He could spend hours capturing the way light played on the waves. Yungho's voice carried a weight Hae-jin hadn't heard before. She asked gently, noting his use of past tense. Yungho nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "We lost him 3 years ago."
Car accident.
He was chasing the perfect sunset shot on a mountain road. He pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph of a younger man with the same kind eyes as Yungho, camera in hand. Minho always said that art wasn't about capturing perfection, but about finding beauty in imperfection. The revelation shifted something in their relationship. Yungho's vulnerability, so freely shared, made Hae-jin see him differently. He wasn't just the successful CEO who collected art. He was someone who understood loss, who carried his own scars beneath his polished exterior. They found a small seafood restaurant, ordering soju and grilled fish. As the night progressed, Hae-jin found herself opening up about her own past. The words came easier with each passing moment, perhaps loosened by the soju, perhaps by Yungho's quiet, understanding presence. "Ji-ho and I met in college," she began, tracing patterns in the condensation on her glass. "He was brilliant, charismatic. Everyone said we were perfect together." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The controls started so gradually, I barely noticed. First, it was suggestions about my clothes, then about my friends. By the time he started criticizing my art, calling it a waste of time, I had already lost myself. Yungho listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she described the final months of her marriage, the isolation, the constant criticism, the way Ji-ho had systematically dismantled her confidence, he reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand.
"You did."
"And just leave," he said quietly. "You saved yourself." Those words stayed with Hae-jin long after they parted ways that evening. Yungho had a way of seeing through to the heart of things, of finding strength where she saw only weakness. Their shared experiences of loss and pain, though different in nature, created a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. They fell into a comfortable routine. Yungho would send her messages about interesting exhibitions or new artists he'd discovered. Hae-jin found herself looking forward to their meetings, to the way he challenged her perspectives on art and life. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never made her feel pressured or rushed. During one of their gallery visits, Yungho noticed Hae-jin sketching in a small notebook she carried. Instead of drawing the artwork on display, she was capturing the way light fell through the gallery's windows, creating shadows that danced across the floor. "You never mentioned you were an artist," he said, genuine interest in his voice. Hae-jin quickly closed the notebook. "I'm not. Not really. It's just something I do sometimes." "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the notebook. After a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. Yungho studied her sketches with the same intensity he brought to evaluating potential acquisitions for his gallery. "These are remarkable. The way you capture light and shadow, it reminds me of Minho's photography." His words awakened something in Hae-jin that she'd thought was long dead, the desire to create, to express herself through art. Years of Jiho's dismissive comments about her hobby had buried that part of her, but here in Busan, under Yungho's encouraging gaze, it began to stir again. Their connection deepened through these shared moments of vulnerability and understanding. Yet even as Haejin felt herself drawn more strongly to Yungho, a part of her remained cautious. The wounds from her marriage were still fresh, and the thought of opening herself to potential hurt again made her hesitate. Still, she couldn't deny the way her heart lifted when she saw his name appear on her phone, or how their conversations made her feel seen and understood in a way she hadn't experienced before. Yungho had become more than just a friend or mentor in the art world. He was becoming a possibility she hadn't dared to imagine when she first arrived in Busan. As autumn deepened into winter, Haejin found herself not just surviving in her new city, but beginning to thrive. The art district no longer felt foreign. It had become home. And Yungho, with his quiet strength and understanding, had become an integral part of that sense of belonging. The message from Jiho arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as Haejin was preparing to meet Yungho for coffee. A simple text that made her hands shake. "I'm in Busan. We need to talk." The carefully constructed piece of her new life suddenly felt fragile, like a glass sculpture balanced on the edge of a table. She canceled her meeting with Yungho, claiming a migraine, and spent the day pacing her small apartment. Jiho's presence in Busan couldn't be coincidence. She had been careful not to share her location with mutual friends, knowing how information had a way of finding its way back to him. The fact that he had tracked her down sent a clear message. He wasn't ready to let go. When Jiho finally appeared at her door the next day, he looked different from the man she'd left behind in Seoul. Gone was the sharp business suit and commanding presence. Instead, he wore casual clothes and carried himself with an air of calculated humility. "You look well," he said, his voice soft and familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. "The air in Busan agrees with you." Haejin kept the door chain latched, creating a physical barrier between them. "How did you find me? Does it matter?" "We're still married, Haejin. I had a right to know where you were." He pressed his hand against the door frame, leaning closer. "I've changed. The therapy, it's helped me understand what I did wrong. I'm not that person anymore." The words were perfect, rehearsed. Jiho had always known exactly what to say, how to present himself as the reformed husband, the penitent partner. But Haejin noticed the familiar tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes when she didn't immediately respond, till she'd learned to recognize during their marriage. "I'm happy here," she said firmly, though her voice threatened to waver. "I've built a new life." "With that gallery owner?" Jiho's tone shifted slightly, an edge creeping in. "Yes, I know about him. Yungho, isn't it? I wonder what he'd think if he knew the real reason you left Seoul." The threat, though veiled, was clear. Haejin felt the familiar panic rising in her chest, the same feeling that had accompanied so many of their conversations toward the end. "There's nothing to tell. We're just friends."
Yeho leapt softly.
"Friends? Like, we were just friends at first? I see the way you're looking at him in those gallery opening photos. The same way you used to look at me." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm staying at the Paradise Hotel. Take some time to think about what you really want, about who really knows you. I'll wait." After he left, Haejin's phone buzzed with a message from Yungho, checking if she was feeling better. The genuine concern in his words made her chest ache. She wanted to tell him everything about Jiho's appearance, his threats, the way her past was threatening to overwhelm her present. Instead, she sent back a brief reply about recovering from the migraine. That evening, Yungho called. "I'm worried about you," he said without preamble. "Something's changed. I can hear it in your voice." Haejin found herself sitting on her apartment floor, phone pressed to her ear, fighting back tears. Yungho's ability to read her, even through a simple text message, both comforted and terrified her. "My ex-husband is in Busan," she finally admitted. "He wants to reconcile." The silence on the other end stretched for a moment. "What do you want?" Yungho asked simply. The question caught her off guard. During her marriage to Jiho, What she wanted had gradually become irrelevant, replaced by what he wanted, what he thought was best. Now, faced with the direct question, she struggled to find an answer. "I don't want to go back," she said finally, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "But it's complicated. There are things about me, about my past." "We all have complicated pasts," Yungho interrupted gently. "What matters is who you choose to be now, and what you choose to fight for." His words should have comforted her, but they only intensified her anxiety. Yungho's faith in her felt undeserved, built on an incomplete picture. Jiho's threats echoed in her mind. How long would that faith last if he followed through on his promises to reveal her past? The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety and conflicting emotions. Jiho sent regular messages, alternating between expressions of remorse and subtle reminders of their shared history and shared secrets. Each time her phone buzzed, Haejin felt her carefully constructed new identity wavering, threatened by the weight of her past. Yungho maintained his steady presence, never pushing but always available. His gallery became both sanctuary and source of guilt, a place where she could temporarily forget Jiho's presence in Busan, but also a reminder of how much she stood to lose if her past came to light. Yungho's proposal came during one of their quieter moments at the gallery as they were reviewing submissions for an upcoming show. "I want you to have your own exhibition," he said, sliding her sketchbook across the table. "These pieces deserve to be seen." The late afternoon light filtered through the gallery windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Haejin stared at her sketchbook, feeling her pulse quicken. Over the past weeks, she'd filled pages with sketches and paintings, each one reflecting her journey in Busan, the vibrant art district, the quiet moments by the sea, the shadows and light that defined her new life. But the thought of displaying them publicly made her throat tighten. "I'm not ready," she said, pushing the sketchbook away. Yungho didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he studied her face with the same careful attention he gave to potential acquisitions. "What are you afraid of?" His question wasn't accusatory but gentle, probing at the edges of her resistance. The truth was complicated. During her marriage, Jiho had systematically undermined her confidence in her art. "It's childish," he would say, or "no one wants to see that kind of amateur work." Over time, she'd learned to hide her sketches, to draw only when he was away on business trips. The habit of concealment had become so ingrained that even now, in the safety of Yungho's gallery, the thought of exposure felt dangerous. "Your work captures something essential," Yungho continued, opening the sketchbook to a particular page, a series of studies showing hands in various positions, some reaching, some withdrawn. "Look at these. The tension, the vulnerability. It's raw and honest in a way that speaks to people." As he talked, Haejin remembered a specific moment with Jiho, 3 years into their marriage. She'd shown him a painting she'd been particularly proud of, a self-portrait that had taken weeks to complete. He looked at it for a long moment before saying, "This is why you shouldn't waste time on hobbies. You'll never be good enough to make it worth the effort." Yungho must have noticed her expression because he reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "Whatever he told you about your art, he was wrong." The statement was direct, brooking no argument. "I've been in this business for 15 years. I know talent when I see it." Over the next few weeks, Yungho helped her prepare for the exhibition. He taught her about curation, about how to arrange pieces to create a narrative flow. Under his guidance, she began to see her work differently, not as isolated sketches, but as parts of a larger story. The preparation process became a form of therapy. Each piece she selected for the show represented a moment in her journey, from the dark, confined sketches she'd made in Seoul to the more expansive, light-filled works she'd created in Busan. Yungho encouraged her to include both, understanding instinctively that the contrast was important to the story she needed to tell. But as the exhibition date approached, Jiho's presence in Busan cast an increasingly dark shadow over her preparations. His messages became more frequent, more pointed. "Remember the gallery opening in Seoul?" One text read, "When you had that panic attack in front of everyone. Some things never change." The memory made her hands shake as she tried to mount a series of drawings. Yungho found her in the back room of the gallery, surrounded by scattered artwork. Without a word, he sat down beside her on the floor, helping her gather the fallen pieces. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "The exhibition can wait." But Heijin looked at the artwork spread around them, the progression from darkness to light, from confinement to freedom, and felt something shift inside her. "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I need to do this. Not just for the art, but for me." Yungho nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. This exhibition wasn't just about displaying artwork. It was about reclaiming her voice, about refusing to let Jiho's influence continue to silence her. Together, they spent the evening arranging and rearranging pieces, creating a visual journey that told her story without words. Yet even as she worked, Jiho's words echoed in her mind. The panic attack he'd mentioned hadn't been random. It had come after weeks of him subtly undermining her confidence, making comments about her appearance, her behavior, her art. The memory of that public humiliation still had power over her, making her question whether she was strong enough to face another opening night. But this time was different. Yungho wasn't just providing a space for her art. He was offering a foundation of support and understanding that she'd never had before. His quiet confidence in her abilities began to counterbalance the weight of Jiho's criticism, creating a space where she could begin to trust her own vision again. As the exhibition took shape, Heijin found herself standing at a crossroads. Behind her lay the safety of invisibility, of keeping her art and herself hidden from judgment. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the possibility of finally being seen and understood on her own terms. The choice, she realized, was no longer about the exhibition itself, but about who she wanted to become. The gallery hummed with anticipation on opening night. Heijin stood in the back room, adjusting her simple black dress, watching through the doorway as early visitors began to filter in. The space had been transformed. Her artwork lined the walls in careful progression, telling the story of her journey from darkness to light. The lighting Yungho had designed cast each piece in perfect illumination, making the colors more vibrant than she'd imagined possible. Yungho appeared beside her, offering a glass of water. "The art critic from the Busan Times just arrived," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "She rarely comes to debut exhibitions. Your work caught her attention." He paused, studying her face. "Are you ready?" The exhibition space filled quickly with collectors, critics, and art enthusiasts. Heijin found herself drawn into conversations about her technique, her inspiration, her use of light and shadow. To her surprise, the words came easily. Each piece held a piece of her story, and sharing it felt like a form of liberation. The praise and genuine interest from visitors began to overshadow the echoes of Jiho's criticism in her mind. A prominent collector spent 20 minutes discussing her series of urban landscapes, particularly drawn to a piece that showed the art district at dawn, when the streets were empty but full of possibility. "The interplay of shadow and hope here is remarkable," he said, gesturing to the way light crept between buildings. "You've captured something universal in these transitions." As the evening progressed, Yungho remained close by, but not hovering, giving her space to shine while staying within reach if she needed support. She caught him watching her several times, his expression holding something more than professional pride. During a quiet moment, he drew her aside to a small alcove away from the crowd. "You're extraordinary," he said softly, his hand finding hers. "Not just your art, but your courage. Watching you tonight." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day at the art fair." The confession hung between them, heavy with possibility and complication. Heijin felt her heart race, recognizing the truth in his words and the answering feeling in her own heart. But before she could respond, she saw a familiar figure enter the gallery over Yungho's shoulder. Jiho moved through the crowd with practiced ease, dressed impeccably in a designer suit. He stopped before each piece, studying it with exaggerated attention. The sight of him examining her work that revealed so much of her inner journey, made Haejin feel exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. Yungho felt her tension and turned, spotting Jiho. His hand tightened slightly around hers. "Do you want me to have security remove him?" Haejin watched as Jiho charmed his way through conversations with other guests, slowly making his way toward them. Each step brought with it memories of their shared past, both the early days when his attention had made her feel special and the later years when that attention had become suffocating. "No," she said finally. "He's here to see if I'll break. I won't give him that satisfaction." But even as she spoke, she felt the familiar anxiety building in her chest. Jiho had always known exactly how to undermine her confidence with a carefully placed word or look. Yungho's declaration of love still hung between them, unanswered. The timing of Jiho's arrival felt deliberate, calculated to disrupt this moment of potential happiness. Haejin found herself caught between the future Yungho offered, one of support, understanding, and genuine affection, and the past that Jiho represented, with all its complicated emotions and unresolved pain. As Jiho approached, his smile perfectly calibrated to appear non-threatening, Haejin felt the weight of the choice before her. Yungho's presence beside her offered strength, but she knew this confrontation was one she would have to face on her own terms. The question was whether she could hold onto the confidence she'd built in these past months, or if Jiho's reappearance would shatter the new identity she'd begun to forge. The gallery lights reflected off the polished floor, creating patterns of light and shadow that mirrored the artwork on the walls and the complexity of the moment itself. In the background, visitors continued to admire her work, unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. The evening that should have been purely about artistic celebration had become something else entirely, a crucible in which her past and potential future collided, demanding a resolution. The exhibition space felt smaller with Jiho's presence, the air heavy with unspoken tension. He stopped directly in front of Haejin and Yungho, his eyes moving between them with calculated assessment. The way he held himself, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, brought back memories of countless social events where he'd controlled every interaction with subtle dominance. "Remarkable work," Jiho said, gesturing to the artwork surrounding them. "You've always had talent, Haejin. I remember telling you that if you focus more on traditional subjects instead of these emotional pieces, you could have had shows in Seoul years ago." His words carried the familiar sting of criticism wrapped in false praise, a technique he'd perfected during their marriage. Yungho stepped forward slightly, but Haejin touched his arm, a silent request to let her handle this. "My art reflects my truth," she responded, keeping her voice steady. "That's something you never understood, Jiho. You wanted to reshape everything about me, my art, my personality, my dreams, to fit your vision." Jiho's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "I was trying to help you reach your potential. Everything I did was for us, for our future." He lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Speaking of the future, have you told your new friend about Beijing? About what really happened there?" The mention of Beijing made Haejin's breath catch. That incident had marked the beginning of the end of their marriage, a moment she'd buried deep in her memory. Yungho noticed her reaction, his concern evident, but he remained respectfully silent, allowing her to navigate this confrontation on her terms. Later that evening, after the gallery had emptied and Jiho had departed with a final, loaded glance, Haejin found herself sitting with Yungho in his office. The space felt safe, removed from the emotional turbulence of the main gallery. She cradled a cup of tea between her hands, the warmth providing an anchor to the present moment. "I need to tell you something," she began, the words feeling heavy in her mouth. "About my past, about Beijing." Yungho sat quietly, his presence supportive. But not demanding. "Jiho wasn't just my husband. He was my manager, my connection to the art world. He controlled every aspect of my career, claiming it was for my protection. In Beijing, there was an opportunity for a major exhibition." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "I had a panic attack during the opening. Jiho had spent weeks before the show critiquing every piece, changing arrangements, telling me I wasn't ready. When I froze in front of the collectors, he stepped in, apologized for my unprofessional behavior. He used that incident for years to prove I couldn't handle the art world without him. Yungho listened intently, his expression thoughtful. That wasn't your failure, he said finally. It was systematic emotional manipulation. He created a situation where you would fail, then used that failure to increase his control. His understanding, free from judgment, made Heijin's eyes fill with tears. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of Jihyo himself, but of falling into old patterns. When he's near, I start doubting everything. My art, my decisions, my right to be happy. Fear doesn't make you weak, Yungho responded, his voice gentle but firm. It makes you human. The difference is in how you respond to it. He hesitated, then continued. What I said earlier about falling in love with you, that hasn't changed. But I understand if you need time, if you're not ready. The moment hung between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. Heijin thought about the exhibition, about how her art had transformed from confined, dark pieces to works full of light and hope. That transformation hadn't happened by accident. It reflected her own journey toward healing. I care about you, she said slowly, carefully choosing her words. But caring terrifies me. Jihyo taught me that love can be a weapon, that vulnerability leads to pain. I need to be sure that I'm choosing you because I want to, not because I'm running from him. Yungho nodded, understanding the complexity of her position. Take the time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. His quiet confidence, so different from Jihyo's demanding presence, offered a glimpse of what a healthy relationship might look like. As they sat in comfortable silence, Heijin realized that while Jihyo's reappearance had shaken her, it hadn't broken her. The strength she'd built in Busan, the confidence she'd gained through her art, remained intact. The choice before her wasn't just about Yungho or Jihyo. It was about trusting herself enough to believe in her own judgment again. The morning after the exhibition, Heijin received a message from Jihyo requesting to meet at a cafe near her apartment. Against her better judgment, she agreed, choosing a busy location where she felt safer. The autumn morning had turned gray, matching her apprehension as she approached the cafe. Jihyo sat at an outdoor table, a manila envelope placed deliberately in front of him. The sight immediately set off warning bells in Heijin's mind. During their marriage, he had often used documents as tools of manipulation, whether financial records or personal correspondence. Your exhibition was quite successful, he began, his tone deceptively casual. Yungho must be pleased. Though I wonder if his board of directors would be equally pleased if they knew about his involvement with a married woman. He tapped the envelope with one finger, especially given some of his past indiscretions. Heijin felt her stomach tighten. What are you talking about? I've been doing some research on your new friend, Jihyo continued, opening the envelope. Did you know he was involved in a scandal at his previous gallery in Seoul? Nothing that made the papers, of course, his family made sure of that. But the documentation exists. He pulled out several papers, keeping them just out of her reach. It would be a shame if this information found its way to his investors, especially now when he's trying to expand the gallery. The threat was clear, but something about it felt off to Heijin. During their marriage, Jihyo had always been meticulous about gathering information before making threats. This felt different, almost desperate. If you had anything real, you would have used it already, she said, surprising herself with her steadiness. Jihyo's expression flickered briefly before settling back into its practiced smoothness. You've changed, he observed. The Heijin I knew would never have been so confrontational. He leaned forward. But let me be clear, I have enough information to damage both you and Yungho. Your choice is simple. End whatever is developing between you two, or watch his reputation crumble. When Heijin returned to her apartment, she found Yungho waiting outside, concern evident in his posture. She had texted him about the meeting, wanting him to know where she was. The sight of him, patient and supportive without being intrusive, made Jihyo's threats feel simultaneously more threatening and more hollow. Inside her apartment, Yungho listened as she recounted Jihyo's threats. His reaction surprised her. Instead of anger or defensiveness, he showed only calm resolve. "Jiho's right about one thing," he said quietly. "There was an incident at my previous gallery, but it's not what he thinks." Yungho explained how he had discovered one of his senior staff members was falsifying provenance documents for certain artworks. When he reported it, the employee tried to implicate him in the scheme. His family had indeed helped manage the situation, not by covering it up, but by ensuring a thorough investigation that cleared his name. Jiho probably found old news reports from the initial accusations, but didn't dig deep enough to find the resolution, Yungho concluded. He's using half-truths to create leverage. The revelation made Haejin see both men in a new light. Jiho's threats, once so powerful, now seemed to reflect his own desperation to maintain control. Meanwhile, Yungho's willingness to be transparent about his past, even knowing it might change her perception of him, demonstrated a trust she had never experienced with Jiho. However, Jiho had one final card to play. That evening, he sent Haejin a series of documents, financial records from their joint accounts during their marriage. "Remember these?" his message read. "The transfers you authorized? The tax implications alone would be enough to end your artistic career before it begins." The documents brought back memories of how Jiho had gradually taken control of their finances, convincing her to sign papers she didn't fully understand, always insisting it was for their mutual benefit. Now, those same documents had become weapons in his arsenal. Yet even as fear threatened to overwhelm her, Haejin felt something else growing stronger: anger. Not the helpless rage she had sometimes felt during their marriage, but a clear, focused determination. She realized that by threatening Yungho, Jiho had inadvertently given her something to fight for beyond her own freedom. That night, as she worked in her studio, Haejin began a new series of paintings, not the careful, controlled pieces she had created during her marriage, but bold, almost aggressive works that channeled her emerging strength. Each brushstroke felt like an act of defiance, a declaration that she would no longer be controlled by fear of exposure or threat of consequences. The financial documents Jiho had sent continued to haunt Haejin's thoughts. One evening, as she reviewed them more carefully in her studio, patterns began to emerge that she hadn't noticed during their marriage. The transfers weren't just routine financial movements. They formed a complex web of transactions that seemed designed to obscure something larger. Yungho found her surrounded by printed statements. Her artist's eye now turned to tracking money flows instead of creating art.
"There
"Is something here," she said without looking up. "Jiho always insisted on handling our finances, claiming I wouldn't understand the complexities. But look at these patterns." She showed Yungho how certain transfers always occurred in specific sequences, how money moved through multiple accounts before reaching its final destination. Having managed his gallery's finances for years, Yungho recognized the sophisticated nature of these transactions immediately. "This isn't just tax avoidance," he said slowly, studying the documents. "These patterns suggest money laundering. The way the funds move through multiple accounts, the timing of the transfers, it's designed to hide the source of the money." The revelation hit Haejin with physical force. During their marriage, Jiho had worked as a financial consultant for several art galleries in Seoul. He had often talked about helping clients optimize their tax situations through art purchases and sales. Now, those conversations took on a darker meaning. "He made me sign these documents," Haejin whispered, her hands shaking as she held up several authorization forms. "He would bring them home late at night, always when I was tired or stressed. He said it was just routine paperwork for our investments." Yungho's expression grew serious. "Your signatures on these documents make you complicit, at least on paper. That's why he's so confident in his threats. He's not just hiding his own activities, he's created a paper trail that implicates you." The weight of this understanding settled over Haejin. Her marriage to Jiho hadn't just been about emotional control, it had been about creating a shield for his illegal activities. Her role as his wife, her signatures on countless documents, had provided legitimacy to his schemes. "What do I do?" she asked, feeling the walls of her newly built life beginning to close in. "If this becomes public, it won't just affect me. The galleries I worked with in Seoul, the collectors who bought pieces through Jiho's recommendations, everyone could be implicated. Yungho sat next to her, his presence steady. "We need professional help. I know a forensic accountant who specializes in art market transactions. She can help us understand exactly what we're dealing with." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But hey, Jean, you need to be prepared. Addressing this might mean going public with everything." The thought of public exposure made her chest tighten, but something had shifted in her perspective. The fear remained, but it was now mixed with anger. Anger at how Yungho had used her trust against her, how he had entangled her in his schemes while making her believe she was too naive to understand finance. That night, Jean couldn't sleep. She found herself in her studio, starting a new painting, a complex, dark piece filled with intersecting lines and shadowy connections, reflecting the web of deception she had discovered. As she worked, she thought about how art had always been her way of processing reality, of making sense of chaos. Yungho's words about being prepared to go public echoed in her mind. The prospect terrified her, but she realized that continuing to hide, to let Yungho control her through these documents, would mean remaining trapped in the past forever. Her art had been about emerging from darkness into light. Perhaps this was the final shadow she needed to confront. The financial revelation cast new light on their entire marriage. Every time Yungho had discouraged her art career, every instance of him controlling their social circles, it hadn't just been about emotional dominance. He had been protecting his financial schemes, ensuring she remained dependent and compliant, a necessary signature on documents she wasn't supposed to understand. As dawn broke, Jean stepped back from her painting, seeing in its tangled lines and dark spaces a map of her own unwitting involvement in Yungho's world. But through the darkness, she had painted streams of light breaking through, representing not just hope, but the clarity of finally understanding the true nature of her marriage. The pressure from Yungho intensified over the next few days as he sensed Jean and Yungho investigating his financial activities. His messages became more frequent and aggressive, alternating between threats and attempts at emotional manipulation. Each notification on her phone made Jean's heart race, but she found herself responding less and less to his provocations. Yungho's forensic accountant friend, Min Seo, worked methodically through the documents. She uncovered a pattern that went beyond simple money laundering. Yungho had been using art sales to create artificial value, inflating prices through a network of ghost buyers and shell companies. The scheme had allowed wealthy clients to both launder money and claim inflated tax deductions for art donations. "The complexity of this system is remarkable," Min Seo explained during a tense meeting in Yungho's office. "Your signatures appear on key documents, Jean, but always in ways that maintain plausible deniability. Yungho structured everything so that you could be implicated without having enough information to expose him. It's professionally manipulative." The revelation of Yungho's calculated exploitation pushed Yungho to take action. Without consulting Jean, he confronted Yungho at his hotel, determined to end his harassment. The meeting, however, didn't go as planned. Yungho had been expecting such a move and used the opportunity to deliver his most potent threat yet. "Your gallery's recent success has drawn attention," Yungho told Yungho with a cold smile. "Imagine the headlines when investors discover their respected CEO is involved with a woman implicated in financial fraud. Your family's influence won't protect you this time." When Yungho reported this conversation to Jean, instead of feeling more trapped, she felt an unexpected surge of clarity. Yungho's attempt to threaten Yungho had crossed a line she didn't even know she had left to cross. The fear that had defined her relationship with Yungho began transforming into something else: determination. "He's made a mistake," Jean said, her voice steady. "He's so focused on maintaining control that he doesn't realize how much evidence we've gathered. Every threat, every message, every manipulated document, they all tell a story he can't control anymore." Yungho watched her with growing admiration as she outlined her plan. Rather than continuing to react to Yungho's threats, they would build a comprehensive case documenting his financial schemes and his pattern of manipulation. Minasio's analysis had already revealed how Yungho had systematically used his position in the art world to facilitate financial crimes. But going public means exposing everything, Yungho cautioned. Your marriage, the manipulation, your unwitting role in his schemes. Are you ready for that level of scrutiny? Haejin turned to look at her artwork displayed in Yungho's gallery, pieces that chronicled her journey from darkness to light, from constraint to freedom. My art has always been about truth, she said softly. Even when Yungho tried to redirect it toward what he called marketable subjects, I kept coming back to honest expression. Maybe it's time to be as brave as my art. The decision to fight back marked a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. Yungho, accustomed to operating in shadows and wielding secrets as weapons, hadn't anticipated Haejin choosing exposure over protection. When she stopped responding to his threats, he began to show signs of desperation, making mistakes that provided even more evidence of his schemes. Yungho stood beside her throughout this transformation, offering support without trying to control the situation. His approach, so different from Yungho's, helped Haejin understand what genuine partnership could look like. Where Yungho had demanded compliance, Yungho offered collaboration. Where Yungho had used her vulnerabilities against her, Yungho helped her find strength in them. As they prepared to take decisive action, Haejin spent long hours in her studio, creating a new series of works that directly addressed the transformation she was experiencing. These pieces combined the technical skill Yungho had always praised with the emotional honesty he had tried to suppress. The result was powerful, art that spoke to both personal truth and universal experience. The stage was set for a final confrontation, but this time, Haejin wasn't facing it as Yungho's controlled wife or even as Yungho's protected partner. She was facing it as herself, an artist who had found her voice, a woman who had reclaimed her power, and someone ready to fight for her own truth, regardless of the consequences. The confrontation with Yungho took place in Yungho's gallery after hours, a fitting location where Haejin's journey of transformation had largely unfolded. The space, usually filled with art and visitors, felt cavernous with just the three of them present. The lighting cast dramatic shadows across the walls, reminiscent of the emotional interplay about to unfold. Haejin had arranged the meeting, surprising both men with her directness. She stood near her latest series of paintings, powerful pieces that documented her emergence from manipulation and control. Yungho arrived first, his usual polished appearance showing subtle signs of strain, a slightly loose tie, the beginnings of dark circles under his eyes. When she revealed the extent of her knowledge about his financial schemes, Yungho's composure cracked. You never had the capacity to understand these transactions, he said, his voice carrying a desperate edge. You're making assumptions about business practices you can't comprehend. I understand perfectly, Haejin responded, her voice steady. I understand how you used my trust, my signatures, and my position as your wife to facilitate money laundering through art sales. I understand how you created a paper trail that could implicate me while protecting yourself. Most importantly, I understand that your power over me was built on lies. The revelation that followed, however, came from Yungho, and it changed everything. I never told you why I recognized your manipulation tactics so easily, Yungho, he said quietly. 3 years ago, before I moved to Busan, you approached my gallery in Seoul with a proposal for creative financing through art sales. The color drained from Yungho's face as Yungho continued. When I refused to participate in your scheme, you tried to destroy my reputation. The scandal you've been threatening to expose? You were behind it from the beginning. You thought you could use it against me now, not realizing I had already documented your involvement back then. This connection between Yungho and Yungho, a hidden thread that had existed before either of them knew Haejin, revealed the true extent of Yungho's manipulative network within the art world. It also explained his desperate attempts to prevent Haejin and Yungho from growing closer, fearing their shared experiences would expose his patterns of behavior. Haejin watched as understanding dawned on Yungho's face, the realization that his carefully constructed web of control was unraveling. His next words came out as a snarl. If you expose me, you'll both go down too. The art world doesn't forgive scandals, and your precious gallery won't survive the publicity. That's where you're wrong, Heijin said, moving to stand beside Yungho. We've already contacted the authorities with evidence of your financial schemes. But more importantly, I'm ready to tell my story, all of it. The manipulation, the control, the way you used art as a cover for fraud. Your power came from keeping people isolated and afraid. That ends now. The transformation in Yungho was remarkable. His sophisticated veneer crumbled, revealing the desperate manipulator beneath. He made one last attempt to reassert control, reaching for the threatening tone that had worked so well in the past. You're nothing without me, Heijin. I made you. I shaped you. Who will you be without my influence? Heijin gestured to her artwork surrounding them, pieces that tracked her journey from confinement to freedom, from fear to strength. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be, she said. An artist who speaks truth through her work. A woman who refused to let fear define her. Someone who found strength not in spite of what you did, but because it taught me what I could survive. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. Yungho's financial schemes were exposed, leading to investigations that implicated several prominent figures in the art world. Heijin's cooperation with authorities, combined with evidence of how Yungho had manipulated her involvement, protected her from legal consequences while ensuring justice was served. In the months that followed, Heijin and Yungho's relationship deepened, built on a foundation of shared understanding and mutual support. The gallery thrived, becoming known for championing artists who pushed boundaries and spoke truth through their work. Heijin's own art evolved, incorporating themes of transformation and resilience that resonated with viewers who had faced their own battles with control and manipulation. The final piece in her next exhibition showed a woman stepping into light, her shadow not disappearing but transforming into wings. It was a testament to how pain could become power, how the very experiences meant to break her had instead taught her to fly. Yungho, standing beside her at the opening, squeezed her hand gently, a gesture that spoke of partnership, not possession. Her story, once hidden in shadows of shame and fear, became a source of strength for others. In choosing to face the truth, to fight back against manipulation with honesty and courage, Heijin had not only freed herself, but had created a blueprint for others trapped in similar cycles of control. Her art, like her journey, became a beacon of hope, proof that even the darkest experiences could lead to light if one was brave enough to keep walking forward.